One of the biggest challenges instrument students face is mastering the approach clearance, from what to say to air traffic control to the different ways you can start an approach. Let's look at this IFR flight to Atlantic City, New Jersey. Our flight plan has us following Victor 268 to the Leah intersection, and we're just now over the Smyrna VOR in Dover Approaches airspace. The best thing you can do as an instrument pilot is plan ahead. When we talk to the final approach controller on a flight, which in this case will be Atlantic City, we should be able to tell them that we have the current ATC information for the destination. So let's pull up the ATC freak 125.72 and listen in. Atlantic City approach, ATC information Sierra, 1854 Zulu, observation, winds 290 at Niner, visibility 7, ceiling 700 broken, temperature 25, dew point 21, altimeter 3003, ILS runway 31 in use. Advise on initial contact you have information Sierra. Okay, information Sierra. Now somewhere over the middle of the Delaware Bay here, we'll be given the handoff to the next approach sector, which will sound like this. November 9er 334 Hotel, contact Atlantic City approach on 124.6. And we'll respond 124.6, 9er 334 Hotel. And we'll switch over to that frequency and call the next controller. Atlantic City approach, Cessna 9er 334 Hotel, direct Leah with information Sierra. Giving the current ATC info to the final controller on our first call is a professional move. It unburdens the controller of having to ask us if we have the latest info, and it means we won't have to listen to the broadcast later in flight when we might be busy setting up the approach. So they'll come back and say, November 9er 334 Hotel, Atlantic City approach. Expect ILS runway 31. And we'll read that back. The phrase expect ILS runway 31 should be magic words to us. They mean two things. Number one, we can pull up the approach plate and brief the approach. Here's the plate for the ILS. We won't go through this in detail since you've already learned how to brief an approach plate. So number two, we can load our approach into our instruments. This means loading any frequencies into our navs, and if we're using GPS, pulling up and loading the approach. Here we're using the GTN 650, so we'll hit proc, approach. We've already got Atlantic City up since that's our destination. We'll hit approach again, select the ILS 31. In transition, we can either do vectors or to a fix. We don't know what this will be yet, so let's select STEV, which is the initial approach fix, and we can change it later if we have to. And we'll hit load. Now we get the disclaimer saying GPS guidance is for monitoring only. This is the ILS, so the GPS is just there for situational awareness. It's not our primary means of navigation. Hit OK, back to the nav page, and now see that even though the approach is loaded with STEV as the transition, it still has us going to Leah along the Victor Airway like we just previously were. No change to our present heading yet, as all we've been told so far is to expect the approach. So that expect the approach instruction is magic words for two things. Number one, we can brief the approach. Number two, we can load it up. Now from here, several things can happen. The controller will either assign us vectors to final or will tell us to proceed direct to the initial approach fix. Let's look at the first scenario, getting radar vectors. The way this works is that the controller sees us on their screen and will assign us headings and altitudes or vectors to fly, in order to align us with the localizer for the approach. The controller has strict rules on how they can do this. In most scenarios, the controller has to give us a vector to intercept the localizer at least 3 miles out from the final approach fix, Pristy, or in this boxed area. And the vector to intercept has to be no more than 30 degrees offset from the final approach course. In some cases, like good weather, we could get a vector closer to the final approach fix, but we'll focus on this area. So the controller will assign us a series of vectors to get us to intercept the course on the proper angle at the proper spot. In addition, the controller will assign altitudes that will allow us to make a normal descent on the approach without being below safe altitudes. So we'll need to listen closely to these assigned headings and altitudes and read them back correctly. Here's the first one. November 34 Hotel, turn right heading 100, vectors for the ILS. And we'll say right heading 100. Now we can activate our approach at this point, either by keeping STEV or activating vectors. The point is, once we no longer need to navigate along the airway, like our original flight plan, we can activate the approach, as that's going to be all the guidance we need from here on out. After flying on that 100 vector, the controller will be watching for when to give us another instruction. They generally try to approximate a downwind and base leg for us as if we're flying a traffic pattern. So here's another vector. November 34 Hotel, turn left heading 040, descend and maintain 1,700. We've been given 1,700 feet. This is the minimum altitude we can intercept the glide slope at, so we can't go below that until we're established on the approach. We'll read that instruction back. Left heading 040, descend and maintain 1,700. And make that turn. Notice that this is sort of like a base leg for the approach. Now, as we get closer to the approach course, we'll receive the approach clearance from ATC, which sounds like this. Cessna 34 Hotel, you're 4 miles from Pristine, turn left heading 340, maintain 1,700 until intercepting localizer, cleared ILS runway 31 approach. This is a mouthful to hear, execute, and read back, so let's see if we can break it down to make it easier. Approach controllers use the acronym PTAC to organize the elements of an approach clearance. You don't have to know this for getting your instrument rating, but it might help you understand it better. PTAC stands for Position, Turn, Altitude, Clearance, and each of these 4 elements is represented in the communication above. Position is 4 miles from Pristine. This is given to us for our own situational awareness. Remember, we're being given vectors, so without onboard navigation guidance like GPS, we might lose track of where we are. The turn is left to 340. This is our vector, about 30 degrees off the final approach course, that'll have us intercept the localizer. Altitude is maintain 1,700 feet. Sometimes they'll say at or above a certain altitude or descend and maintain a certain altitude. Finally, the clearance is the type of approach, ILS, and the runway number, 31, so we can confirm the concrete we'll be landing on. All approach clearances are organized this way, so if we know what's coming, it'll be easier to understand, execute, and read back. Now when we read back, we can drop the PE position and just read back the turn, altitude, and clearance. So we'll then say, left to 340, maintain 1,700 until localizer, cleared ILS 31. So we'll make that turn, intercept the localizer, and start flying inbound using the ILS guidance. Once the controller sees what we've established on the approach, we'll get handed off to the tower. Cessna 34 Hotel, contact Atlantic City Tower on 120.3. We'll say tower on 120.3, 34 Hotel. Switch frequencies, contact tower. Atlantic City Tower, Cessna 9334 Hotel on the ILS runway 31. And the tower controller will say, November 9334 Hotel, Atlantic City Tower. The wind's 280 at 8, runway 31, cleared to land. We'll read back our landing clearance. Runway 31, cleared to land, 9334 Hotel, and land. Notice the controller responsibilities. The approach controller clears us for the approach, while the tower controller clears us to land. Okay, so lots of activity packed into that small phase of flight. Let's look at the same approach, only now instead of getting vectors, we're going to get told to proceed direct to the initial approach fix. Here we are approaching Leah again, with the approach loaded but not yet activated, and we get told, November 9334 Hotel, turn left, direct STEV. STEV is the initial approach fix for the ILS. We'll read back, direct STEV 9334 Hotel. We can now activate the approach and it'll navigate us direct to STEV on track 102, and we'll fly that toward the fix. Since we're going direct, no need for radar vectors. And so the next thing we'll hear will be our approach clearance. Before it comes up, see if you can make out the 4 elements from PTAC. November 34 Hotel, you're 5 miles from STEV, cross STEV at or above 2,000, cleared ILS runway 31 approach. Again, it's 5 miles from STEV, direct STEV at or above 2,000, cleared ILS 31 approach. Sometimes the controller won't mention an altitude on our clearance. In that case, we'll need to stay at our last assigned altitude and then descend by following all the altitude restrictions on the approach. Okay, so we'll read this clearance back. Cross STEV at or above 2,000, cleared ILS 31. Now, there's a racetrack pattern here indicating a hold in lieu of procedure turn. We weren't told to proceed straight in on the approach, so unless the controller said anything else, the expectation would be that we would do the full procedure turn, meaning a teardrop entry, right turn around to intercept the localizer. In practice, it's highly recommended that you coordinate with the controller if you're planning on doing the procedure turn by confirming if you should do the procedure turn or do the full approach or something along those lines. Don't just assume you and the controller are on the same page here. From here, once we're established, it'll be the same procedure getting handed off to the tower and cleared to land. Cessna 34 Hotel, contact Atlantic City Tower on 120.3. Tower on 120.3, 34 Hotel. Atlantic City Tower, Cessna 90334 Hotel on the ILS, runway 31. November 90334 Hotel, Atlantic City Tower, the wind's 280 at 8, runway 31, cleared to land. Runway 31, cleared to land, 90334 Hotel. And another smooth instrument landing. Approach clearances are a common area of trouble during instrument training, so getting a breakdown on the different elements and the different variations of instructions can make things clearer. If this was helpful, please click subscribe so that you could stay up to date on every new training video coming out each Tuesday and Friday and get access to posts and articles on the community page that'll take your training even further. It just takes one click and it's so worth it.